Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. I'm your host, Nick Palavita, and today we're going to have a great panel, a great discussion dealing with the uh, wonderful U.S. dollar. So first of all, we're going to bring our panelist, the president of the Pod TV network, Kim Calhoun, has joined us for this great conversation about the U.S. dollar. And of course, you were moderating the show while I was bebopping through Europe last week. We're also bringing Mark
We
Lee,
missed
who
you.
is
We missed you.
yeah. Well, I'm back like a bad disease.
No,
Mark
that's
Lee
a good point.
is also producer at the Pod TV network, and who's going to be with us for a little while. We're bringing the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States, who can shed some light on what's going on internationally with the U.S. dollar. So, David, we have
Welcome
the topic
back,
for the day. What?
Welcome back.
Yeah, it was good to go through Morocco and Spain, and the dollar was still strong there. I bought a lot of stuff over there. I have 2 boxes of DHL. I had another one coming from Morocco, so I can tell you the dollar's still strong. But when I was overseas, one of the big developments was the China getting together and basically pushing the yuan as the world reserve currency. So the question is, the United States and the U.S. dollar going to lose the world reserve currency status? What are your thoughts on that before we get to another even more important issue? Is the United States in the next 7 weeks going to default on their debt? So we'll hand it to you.
Well, first, as you know, Nick, both of these topics are addressed to varying degrees in my latest book, American 2040, Still a Superpower ? With regard to the reserve currency, in the book, I said that there was going to be an alliance against U.S. interest economically, diplomatically, militarily, and culturally. And one dimension of that economically was reserve currency status. And the alliance was China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, and several other countries. What we've seen in the last 2 weeks is a number of concrete steps that have been taken by China and others to try to come up with alternatives to the dollar, whether it be a single currency or a basket of currencies. And my personal view is the United States will not lose reserve currency status, but that we will reduce our market share. And some of the things that we've seen is, Saudi Arabia now saying that they'll sell their oil with currencies other than dollars. And you know as well as I do that there are several tremendous advantages that we get by being the leading reserve currency. I think about 60% of central bank reserves are in dollars. And the three main advantages is that we could borrow at a lower rate than otherwise would be the case. We have advantages from a trade standpoint. And thirdly, we have the ability to impose economic sanctions on nations and individuals based upon that status. But ironically, one of the reasons that people want to move away from the dollar is they don't like the idea that we can impose those economic sanctions. They want alternatives to U.S. power from all those dimensions that we talked about. So, those are my thoughts. We're not reserve currency status, but we are going to lose market share over time.
Hey, David, along those same lines, and we talked about it the last time we were on the show, and I've been doing some research on it and doing some interesting readings on it. And we talked about something that I know you mentioned before, which is BRICS. And a lot of those countries historically have not been the greatest friends of the United States. Even Brazil has had its issues with us, definitely Russia and, India. That's kind of on the fence in terms of what its relationship with the U.S. is. But quite a few of these definitely have not had the best relationships, including China and everything. But there are some other ones that have put in membership that have been on our friendship list in the past. So that actually surprised me when I saw that apparently there are countries like Argentina, Algeria, and even Egypt and Nigeria, and even our good friends to the south of us, Mexico, that are applying to be part of this BRICS alliance, including, like I said, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Indonesia. But, Nigeria is definitely an economic power to some degree in Africa and around the globe, and it has been a friend of the United States. I could say the same probably about Egypt and a number of other things, and definitely even Argentina, I think, has been pretty much pro-West. So is there a danger when some of these pro-West countries are starting to look strongly at the possibility of this BRICS movement?
I think that is a warning sign. Let's understand that there are several different alliances out there, okay, or international consortiums out there. The UN has something called the non-aligned movement. And as you know, I used to be chairman of the audit committee of the United Nations. And so I've got some experience dealing with the UN. And I can't recall the exact number of countries that are in the non-aligned movement. I want to say it was in the 70s, roughly 70 some countries out of roughly 190 countries in the world. And the leader of the non-aligned movement was India, but Brazil was part of it. And a number of the countries that you're talking about were part of it as well. And they basically were non-aligned against the historical polar interest of the U.S. and Russia. But now we've got the emergence of China. And as you know, China has a strategic plan, which includes all the dimensions we talked about, which includes the Belt and Road Initiative, where they're very aggressive at trying to establish relations and economic interest around the world, including in Africa, including in South America, where they're trying to gain access to critical minerals, where they're trying to be able to help with building ports and other critical infrastructure using their labor and using their capital. So they're very aggressive. I think we have to be more concerned when you have countries that historically have been aligned to the United States to one degree or another start moving the other way. And the ultimate irony might be Argentina, because you know what they use for their currency? The dollar.
What it is. Right.
The dollar.
The dollar. That's their currency. Although we also know that, Nick, I haven't been counting, but I think they've gone bankrupt at least twice.
Yeah, they've had serious financial issues over there in Argentina. But it seems to me, though, China actually does have a policy. They have BRICS. They have the Belt and Road Initiative. Yeah. And I look to the United States and see what we have, and I didn't find anything. So
you didn't miss it, Nick.
I was going to say, maybe you can shed some light.
We've been a republic since 1789.
Yeah.
And we still don't have a comprehensive, integrated, future-focused, results-oriented, resource-constrained plan focused on those four dimensions. And we consider our plan the budget. The budget is a one-year document, and it's not outcome-based.
Yeah. Yeah. And but also, if you look at the power of BRICS, you have Brazil. I mean, don't we have to start questioning whether these people are allies or not, or friends of ours? Okay, so Brazil heads it up. Then Russia. We know where Russia stands. Their objective is to destroy the West. They don't really care. Then you have India. We have a lot of people in India come on our shows, David, but we're going to have to start asking questions. Whose side are you on? Seriously, because India, I think, recently became the largest country, or will, in the world, with 1.6 billion people in terms of population. Then you have China. China, I'm glad to see India and China aren't in a war, but are they in a Cold War against the United States? That's a good question, okay? Because India, China, and then South Africa. What's South Africa doing in this equation? So we look at this.
They were an ally at one point.
But you look at this BRICS alliance, then you look at what does the U.S. have? And I couldn't find anything, David. I was going, I like to travel internationally, but I also like to go to countries that don't hate Americans. And
we've got countries, we've got Europe. There's a whole list. I found it, and most of it is NATO. Because last week after we had this conversation, I'm like, who is on our side? And I mean, some of them are probably still questionable, but there was a really nice tall list. But it's still, we got to unite a little bit harder with some people who are going to be stronger and more powerful alliances with us if we're going to continue on the path of still being the superpower, I think.
But Jim, along those same lines, and I know that Sasha's not here with us, and I kind of alluded to it in our last show and everything, meaning the new show earlier today. There has been some, we're still continue to give a lot of money in this war between Russia and Ukraine. Most of it, all of it, unless we're doing some money by proxy to the other side, but I would say the vast majority going to Ukraine. But there has now been some questions as to how much of that money is actually going to the battlefield. It kind of comes down to that same conversation that used to exist around farm aid and aid to other countries, and whether those supplies actually got to the people that needed it, or whether the elite were getting it, because there's been some even accusations about some of the elite within the Ukrainian government getting some of that money and stashing that money, and apparently some sizable amounts and all in that space. So Joe, we have some question what we're doing been in that support some of the Ukrainians, because they are definitely
probably be to
battle, but we also got to have some accountability as to where the money is going. And I do understand that Zelensky at least recognized what was going on and did have some actions against some of the folks that he caught. Now, whether he caught all of them or he just gave a slap on the wrist to a couple of them that he decided to, that is a question for conversation.
Yeah.
Well, we're providing lots of different types of aid
Right.
in Ukraine, and we're doing way more than our fair share.
Right.
Okay, because the European countries have come to rely upon Uncle Sugar to be able to do a disproportionate share. Yeah, and our aid is not just military aid. Our aid is a large amount of economic assistance. In fact, I think the economic assistance is greater than the military assistance. One example is, pensions, helping them be able to pay pensions for their civil servants and their teachers and things of that nature, because needless to say, this war has had a serious adverse impact on their economy and their ability to be able to handle their normal obligations. But, let's look back at some of these countries. We know that Russia and China and Iran and North Korea are aligned in U.S. interest. Against U.S. interests there, okay? But then you look at some of these other countries and you say, okay, well, India. Well, India's, India is trying to find its way, I think, okay? I mean, India is a democracy. India has had a border conflict with China before. I don't see India aligning with China, okay? India has may be looking to try to establish its own area of influence themselves. They clearly have the ability to do that. But India has also historically relied upon Russia for military equipment. And India is also, as well as China, buying oil from Russia, which is undercutting the sanctions that the Western nations have. In the case of South America arguably is one of the leading, if not the leading country in South America from a variety of different perspectives. Okay. And so Brazil is arguably the leading or one of the leading countries in South America. Obviously Mexico is the leading country in Central America, no question. We do have alliances. Okay. I mean, there is an association for Latin America countries, which the United States is part of. We have NATO, okay, which is a military alliance, defensive alliance. We have SATO, which is a military Southeast Asia, which is a military defensive alliance in Southeast Asia, which includes countries like Japan and Australia and Thailand, et cetera. And so we do, but we've been resting on our laurels for way too long.
Speaking of resting on our laurels,
we need to be much more. We need to be much more proactive, much more strategic, and we need to recognize that we need alliances more now than ever.
Right. Yeah.
Speaking of alliances, and I think it was maybe Lee with popping in, as well, and all in that space. As a matter of fact, he's there with us. But speaking of alliances, one of the things that I was curious about is some of these countries are also doing some interesting things on their own economic self-interest. Because one of the things that I was reading about was around Saudi Arabia, and they're having some interesting relationships that are going on that I just recently learned about. For one, and I come back to something that Kim said, I think it was on last week's show, about how we need to protect some of our own interests even here in the United States. But apparently Saudi Arabia had a 2021 mandate that said that foreign firms had to establish a local headquarters by the end of 2023, which is the weird year we're in now, or risk losing out on lucrative government contracts. And that's definitely been a conversation that's been going on there. Do we need something similar? And I know that the other thing that they're doing is apparently they're getting ready to try to get 500,000 women to come in from Ethiopia. So apparently they've got a relationship now with Ethiopia where they're going to bring these women to work as domestic workers. So I don't know that we need to get domestic workers coming to the United States, but do we need to have these rules about how people are coming in and whether they need to have an established presence in the way that Saudi Arabia is doing?
I'm not sure. You know, I mean, that's an immigration question. I think what we're looking at, not so much immigration, Mark, is the United States going to strengthen our international alliances? Because at least this is why I see it, David, but I go to Chinese websites. David, China wants to rule the world. I mean, and they've made it perfectly clear they want to knock the United States off and put the Chinese, as they say, rightfully so, in charge of the world government. The United States response is nothing. In other words, it's almost like we're ignoring a verbal and standard threat by the Chinese to basically create world dominance. And we're sitting there going, okay, go ahead. We're not going to do anything. And BRICS is just one part of what they're doing. I'll also give you this. So when I was in Morocco, like last week, what television programs do you get to watch? Do you get to watch ABC from the US? No. CBS? No. NBC? No. But you could watch CGTV. That's Chinese government television. China in English, by the way. So the thing is, the TV I got to watch in Spain and Morocco was Chinese media. Where was the US media companies?
Well,
They're not even there.
Do you know who owns the largest movie chain in the United States?
I have no idea. Who? China would not
Chinese.
surprise me.
Yeah.
But see, it's so important.
That's part of their strategy.
Part of their strategy. I mean,
is cultural influence.
Yeah, cultural influence.
Right.
And they had all English-speaking people on the show. It looked like an American show. It was like if you ever saw RT called Russian Times.
Yeah.
It was all like American, but it was owned by Russia. Well,
Yeah.
China, to give you an idea of their influence, the first thing you do, is Goebbels knew and Hitler knew, is take over the media. Even Putin knew that. If you're going to start a war, first thing you do is shut down every media except them. China's not stupid. So what
they're very smart.
They're very smart. So
they've got their own challenges. They've got bigger demographic challenges than we do and whatever else. But all the more reason why I'm saying I think our highest degree of vulnerability is really within the next 5 to 10 years. You know, and I would say within the next 5 years, especially for things like Taiwan, because they're rising, we're declining, absent a course correction. And given some of the challenges they face, especially with regard to demographics, you know, they have an incentive to, if they want to do something, to do it sooner rather than later.
But
now,
David, that kind of comes to the point I was making, and I know that Nick kind of dismissed it because part of it was around immigration and everything. But you used to work in the government, and particularly in the space of finances and all in that kind of lane in your work as the comptroller general and all in that kind of space. But is there any rules that are here in the United States that exist that say, which we see all over the country, including where Lee is in New York, that if a company wants to come to China and buy up this property, whether it's that movie theater that you're talking about, I can't think of the one that it is, but I did know that they were Chinese based and all of that, or whether they buy up half of California and half of Hollywood, that they have to give something back to the United States, much in the way that Saudi Arabia has created this rule that they have to do this or lose out on the government contracts in that part of the world. So do we have anything similar that stops this influx that is taking place.
Well, no. I mean, what's happening now with regard to the property issue is the states are taking action because the states are sovereign entities, and they're taking actions to be able to prohibit certain entities that are deemed to be security or other risk, which would include companies that are owned by the PRC, to be able to purchase property. And the two things that they're most concerned about is agricultural property and property that is close to key military and other government installations. But again, this is another example of the Chinese are very strategic. Okay. Yeah. They've been doing this for several years. We're just now waking up to this, right? And so they're going to try to stop it, but that doesn't mean they can unwind what's already happened. All right. I mean, I haven't had any discussion about that, but at some point, Nick, we probably ought to pivot, if you want my input on it, to the debt ceiling. And then y'all can continue the conversation with regard to these other issues, because I can't stay the full hour. You're muted, Nick. You're muted.
The debt ceiling to me is very important, especially if the United States makes a big blunder on the chessboard and defaults. Okay. And now there's this brinkmanship going on again, once again, with the debt ceiling. So what are your thoughts on that? McCarthy apparently said no give to this, and Joe Biden goes no give to that. Hey, you know, between both of them, they could destroy the U.S. economy, and then China doesn't have to do anything. You know, they just let the U.S. implode because of their own stupidity. What are your thoughts?
Well, but that's part of China's strategy. Yeah. China doesn't ever plan to attack the United States. I mean,
they don't
be an idiot to attack the United States. I mean,
right.
You know, but they're planning for us to implode from within. Okay.
Right.
And all right. So let's talk about what the debt ceiling is and isn't, and then we can talk about what may happen. You know, the debt ceiling is statutory. There's nothing in the Constitution at the present time that limits Congress fiscally. Congress has the power of the purse. The president proposes budget. The Congress disposes of budget and appropriations. But there are no limits on the amount of debt, and there are no limits on, you know, on fiscal constraint. The debt ceiling is a statutory limit. It's something that Congress created back during World War I, because before World War I, we never had debt to GDP over 40%, but this was supposed to be the war that was going to end all wars. And Congress used to approve every issuance of new debt. And, you know, when you're fiscally responsible, you don't necessarily have to do that often, right? But when you get into a world war, it's likely to be more frequent. And so they passed the debt ceiling limit with the idea that it was intended to provide some fiscal constraint, but it was also intended to be an efficiency measure, so they didn't have to approve each increase or each issuance of debt by the Treasury Department. Okay. You know, fast forward to where we are now, you know, the debt ceiling is a lag indicator. Okay. Because the Congress ends up passing budgets and appropriations bills that by definition carry the force of law and tell you that we're going to need to increase the debt limit because they've already authorized spending well in excess of anticipated revenues, right? And there's nothing to constrain it. Now, here's what's important to understand. There's a lot of disinformation and misinformation about the debt ceiling, all right? First, there's only one thing in the Constitution of the United States, financial item, that's guaranteed by the Constitution, and that is debt and accrued interest to the United States. By that, I mean Treasury securities. Treasury securities and accrued interest. Those are guaranteed by the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. We will not default on that, okay? We can't default on that. Secondly, a lot of people try to say, well, you know, if we hit the debt ceiling, then we're not going to be able to pay Social Security and Medicare benefits. Not true, because as long as you have assets in the so-called trust funds, which, by the way, is government debt, as long as you have assets in the so-called trust funds, then you can cash in those bonds, which are non-readily marketable, closely held bonds, go to the market to be able to generate the cash, because those bonds are counted in the debt ceiling. All right. And so as a result, you're just moving from closely held bonds to bonds, held by the public. And that doesn't change the amount subject to the debt ceiling. Now, obviously, the amounts that are in those trust funds are drawing down, as has been noted in the latest Social Security Medicare trustees report. But if we did hit the debt ceiling, what would have to happen? You wouldn't be able to pay everything else. You'd have to start making choices on what you were going to pay. You'd have to probably have a partial government shutdown, so you could save payroll costs, at least temporarily. You'd probably have to delay payment of contractors. We don't want that to happen. It should not happen. In my view, it won't happen. But they need to start getting serious about what kind of deal can be done, because the idea of raising the debt ceiling without any conditions, to me, is not appropriate. We are totally out of control. On the other hand, we need to be talking about what kind of conditions ought to be part of a debt ceiling deal. In my view, you have the budget process, which is what you should be using to cut spending. All right. And so that should be handled through that normal process. The question is, what can we do as a condition of the debt ceiling that might actually help us to start treating the disease? By that, I mean the large and growing imbalance between projected spending and revenues. What are we going to do to close that gap? And that's why when I testified a couple of weeks ago in the House, I said you should think seriously about creating some type of a statutory, which means the Congress buys in, the president buys in, statutory fiscal sustainability commission comprised of capable, credible, and non-conflicted individuals that would engage the American people with the facts, the truth, the tough choices, solicit input, set the table for tough choices on social insurance programs, defense and other discretionary spending, and revenues. Because we need to do that. The only way we're not going to be able to put our finances in order through the regular order. That's just not going to happen. And statutory approaches just haven't stood the test of time. Last thing is, as I've said many times before, we've got to have a constitutional amendment that limits how much debt as a percentage of the economy we can take on absent extraordinary circumstances, because one Congress can't bind the next Congress through statutory approaches. The only thing that can bind current and future Congresses is a constitutional amendment.
Hey, David, along those same lines, and I do not tend to be the economic or the economist among this group and everything, but I've been hearing a lot of conversation online and a lot of other places about this. We're coming up on tax season, and tomorrow is officially tax day, since the 15th fell on the weekend and all that. And I know some people got extensions, but apparently the United States has this whole notion.
It's today.
Tax day is today.
Okay. Yeah. Today's the 17th.
Be sure you file that timely extension, Mark.
I got you covered. But the question in that space was, with taxes being filed and all of that being done, the U.S. also has to keep its money in line. And I've been hearing conversations over the last several days and several months about this $1 trillion, and I said trillions in plural, that is apparently out there just missing or miscounted or not being properly counted and all of that. They were talking about like some derivatives and some other things in that space. I'm going like, how do you lose $65 trillion in accounting, and how do we get around this unrecorded stuff that's on the balance sheet? Because when I'm going like, wait a minute, there's like $1 trillion lost, as a regular citizen, I'm going like, how does the government lose 65 or however many trillions of dollars in that space? A lot of folks can't even fathom that amount. So please try to explain that to the common folks like myself.
Well, I'm not sure about what 60. Okay, maybe I think I know what you're talking about. We have a budget which is cash based.
Right.
And we have annual financial statements which are accrual based. Mm-hmm. But we need additional improvements to the annual financial statement. For example, the amount that we owe to Social Security, Medicare, and other government trust funds the so-called, the closely held bonds that are guaranteed by the full faith and credit of the United States government, both as to principal and interest, and the 14th Amendment, they're not counted as a liability by the government. Because what they want to say is, well, we really owe it to ourselves. No, you don't. You owe it to the beneficiaries of the Social Security and Medicare system. You took their money. You spent their money on other things. You replaced it with a bond that's guaranteed. It's got legal constitutional substance. You should recognize that as a liability, because you should treat these trust funds as separate and distinct legal entities, not as a separate account or sub-account under the general ledger. All right. Another example is the biggest numbers relating to the U.S. government are the differences between what we've promised for Social Security and Medicare and the amount of expected revenues we have to deliver on those promises, and the bonds that we have that are guaranteed. That's the $75+ trillion number.
Yeah, that would definitely be that.
And statements.
Yeah.
But they're in the footnotes.
They're in the footnotes.
That's what this article was talking about. The article.
Let me clarify. There is a separate statement of social insurance. I apologize. We got that done when I was Comptroller General. We got that done. We also got laid the foundation for a long-range fiscal projection when I was Comptroller General. But it's not on the balance sheet. And so what I've argued is two big things. One, the bonds ought to be on the balance sheet as a liability, and we should have a double bottom line for the balance sheet. The first bottom line should be the numbers with the current numbers with the intergovernmental bonds. The second one, which should consider the unfunded obligations of Social Security and Medicare. So we should have a double bottom line. So we're providing much more visibility, much more transparency with regard to our true situation. And I continue to advocate for that.
No, it's definitely doing a great job of advocating. I loved the testimony and everything. But just to go in what you're saying, part of it is the stuff that's in the United States, but apparently it's also some of our relationship, to come back to our first part of the conversation, with the foreign governments. Because when I was reading this article in Bloomberg, and I'll say where the article came from and everything, it was given, and you'll love this, Nick, they gave the example of a pension fund, because they said, consider a Dutch pension fund buying assets in the U.S. as part of the transaction. It will often use a foreign currency swap to exchange euros for dollars. Then when it's closed out, the fund will repay dollars and receive euros. But for the length of the trade, the payment obligation is recorded as off balance sheets, which the BIS is calling a blind spot in the financial system. So I think
you can play games.
That's not government finances, okay? That's private sector finances. But go ahead. Yeah.
Well, also, David, you can play games all you want in the area of pensions. Like France, when I was overseas, they went on strike because they moved the normal retirement age in their pensions, which is basically our Social Security, from the age of 60 to 64, which is still 2 years less than our normal retirement age, which is 66 and 2/3, continually moving up. Okay, what created was strikes. I didn't know if I was going to get home because I was going through Paris, and they closed down Charles de Gaulle, strikes, garbage on the streets. People just went crazy. But we have a real problem here because the pension, our Social Security, is not in good shape. And what are we going to do? Wait until it goes bust and then do the fix next decade?
Here's the deal on that.
I don't get it.
Here's the deal on that. There are plenty of demagogues and laggards in politics that want to say, don't touch Social Security, don't touch Medicare, or so-and-so wants to touch Social Security and Medicare, and they try to demagogue, all right?
Right.
But here's the truth.
You have to.
The truth is, you have to.
Thank you, sir.
The other truth is, if you do nothing, you are de facto arguing for cutting 20% plus of Social Security benefits across the board, increasing. So that's what they don't want to talk about, all right? And the last time that we reformed Social Security was 1983. Now, why did we do it in 1983? The reason being is the so-called trust funds were going to go to zero within weeks.
Right.
If the trust funds go to zero, by current law, you can only pay benefits out of trust fund assets.
There's nothing to
Therefore,
pay.
to the extent that you've got a gap, which is that 20% plus number that I mentioned before, you got a gap, you have to immediately cut benefits across the board. Now, that's obviously inequitable, and it's obviously not politically feasible because the people who vote with the greatest propensity are seniors.
Mhm.
But in that case, they didn't do anything until they got within weeks of the benefits. Now, this is an example of something that a fiscal sustainability commission could deal with. All right. There are other proposals out there for things. There's something called the Trust Act, which would set up a commissions for Social Security and Medicare and the Highway Trust Fund, separate commissions comprised of members of Congress who have less than a 20% positive rating by the American people, who would try to come up with recommendations on these programs within, I think, like 90 days. How much interaction are you going to get with the public, meaningful interaction in 90 days? Okay. I mean, what we have to recognize is we need a comprehensive solution that doesn't just deal with social insurance programs, but also deals with defense and other discretionary spending and the tax code and revenues. And that's going to take time. This commission is going to need probably a year to be able to do what really needs to be done in a meaningful way, and then set the table for a vote by members of Congress.
Yeah. And actuarially, the sooner you get to the problem, it's like a disease. The sooner you get to the problem, the easier the correction is, actuarially. When we wait, which is what it looks like they're going to do, then when you try to correct it actuarially, it is a huge problem. The disease is basically taken over, and the corrections are very poor. So the sooner you address it, the better. Unfortunately, the politicians have to tell America the truth. None of them will. That we either have to raise taxes to cover the Social Security, cut the benefits of Social Security, or frankly do both. Yeah. Okay, none of that's good news. None of it's going to get you elected.
They're
ultimately, it is the truth.
Yeah, they're ultimately going to do some of both. Okay, they're going to do some of both.
They have to.
At the same point in time, people who are retired or who are very close to retirement are not likely to be affected very much.
That's correct. Right.
The younger you are,
the more you're going to be affected.
Off you are financially, the more you're going to be affected. But here's the frustration. The frustration is seniors think they're going to get taken advantage of. There are other words I could use, but I won't use them. Young people don't think they're going to get anything. They're both wrong. So therefore, if we end up reforming the program sooner rather than later, phasing in the changes over time,
right,
we can exceed the expectation of every generation of America. But this comes back to the biggest deficit this country has, even though the budget deficit's big. That's not the biggest one. The biggest one is the leadership deficit.
Yeah, they don't have leadership at all, because if they would, somebody would sit there and say, "I'm going to tell you the bloody truth about Social Security."
That's why you need capable, credible, respected, and non-conflicted individuals to comprise these commissions.
Right.
Because they're not running for re-election.
Right.
They don't have a 20% approval rating. Okay.
Yeah.
They don't, and you don't want people from interest groups either.
Yeah.
That have a vested interest in the defense establishment or Social Security or Medicare. You don't want that either.
And also, there was a recent article I pulled from Imprints, which was a pretty good rag, dealing with America's broken healthcare systems. And one thing they said is that in the United States, we overspend relative to other countries $2.3 trillion a year in health benefits. Okay. I think Social Security is easier to solve as soon as somebody's.
It's much easier. Healthcare
much easier to
2.5
solve.
times greater. 2.5 times greater.
Right. Yeah.
Just for Medicare.
Right. Medicare is a different story. But if you look at this article, and he ran the math, it was a doctor, professor. he ran the math and said America overspends on healthcare, 2.3 trillion a year. Okay. Somewhere along the lines, we need to get a grasp on our healthcare system as well.
Well, we ought to have a separate show on that, because at least one show on that. I'm gonna need to get.
I know
going.
you got to get ready to go, Dave.
Right.
But quick question for you, and I know you get ready to bounce. But how much do the congressmen get in terms of healthcare? Don't they get some sort of discount in their healthcare?
Oh, the Congress is their employer. They get health care just like any employee gets.
So they get
They
discount.
also get retiree health care.
Right.
They get retiree health care if they work a certain amount of time. I mean,
No, that's what I thought. And the other thing I was going to ask is they probably also get a pay raise on a regular basis. And I'm wondering, when are we going to see a freeze on that pay raise, kind of coming to Nick's point around leadership? Because every time I turn around.
Keep in mind the 27th Amendment, which is the latest amendment, which took over 200 years to ratify, okay, which says that one Congress can't raise their own pay. If they want to raise the pay, it can't be effective until the next Congress, so that they can be held accountable through an election cycle. There is discussion. There are proposals to raise congressional pay because they don't like inflation, although they caused it. All right. So that's how the system works. Understand this. Believe it or not, you can work for the federal government for 5 years near the end of your career, retire, and be eligible for retiree health care for life. Now,
beat that.
I don't know any company that would do
No companies.
Nobody.
I mean,
Nobody does that.
All right. Well, I got to get going, and you guys continue. And
Take care.
Appreciate it. Welcome back, Nick. Good to see everybody.
Yeah.
Have a good week, Dave.
All the best.
Hey,
All right.
you too.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Hey, Nick, can we
Yeah.
get a health care program like that from when we retire?
Take care, buddy.
No. You better hope to get on Medicare. I mean,
Kim, you can get one. You just have to find someone to pay for it. Like a
Medicare
taxpayer.
sucks.
Medicare is your
Yes.
only hope.
Medicare
Obi-Wan
sucks. You still have
Kenobi.
to pay a lot of money for
You
it.
do-
And then you
you
got to
do.
get A,
You're right.
B, or C.
You're right.
Then
You're
you have
right.
to hire a consultant to tell you whether you need
Hey, listen,
to B
it's
or
better
C.
than
Then you have to
Nick,
do
hold
it every
on.
year.
Nick and Kim, hold on a second. Y'all are both missing the point here. I've just figured it out. Lee will
You figured
enjoy
it
this
out,
and
good.
everything. I have figured it out. So officially, this is what's going to happen. I want y'all to listen to me very carefully, and I think Lee will like my prediction. But in the year, I can't give him the next one because that's too soon and everything. But in the year 2028, Lee Newton Rhodes will become president of the United States. That will be what is going to happen. Lee Newton Rhodes
I'll
will
buy
become
into that.
the United States, and he is going to make Pod TV the official television station of the United States, in which we will have free health care and all of that
There
space.
you
So I'm thinking
Well,
That's on my list, Mark.
And get rid of all the other press.
Huh?
Get rid of all the other press.
We'll have federal health care, and he can appoint David to run the budget. So
Well, yeah,
We should get Pod TV in airports, too. Get rid of CNN and get Pod TV in the airports.
there you go.
It doesn't make any difference until you get the cost under control. See, it doesn't matter if you use a Medicare system, a federal system, like this article pointed out quite correctly. I think the United States, we overspend 2.3 trillion a year on our healthcare system.
So,
Okay,
but
more than
Nick,
any other
you're
country.
not looking at the overall cost. Healthcare premiums cost about $7,000 a year. Then you have to pay a deductible, which runs around $7,000, and then you have to an out of pocket, which runs $12,000, and then on top of that, then you can pay your you've got the medical expense. So
Right.
you forgot to include the reason why it costs so much is the impact of our insurance companies.
Yeah, but the insurance companies have no incentive to keep the cost down, because what they do is they charge the fee to everybody plus a 25% markup, and there's no incentive to keep it down. So whatever they have to pay out,
so the doctors
they pay
are
out,
not
and then they add
getting paid.
25% and send it in.
The doctors aren't getting paid. In fact, we have such a shortage on medical doctors right now because the system is all screwed up that in 10 years it's not going to matter. We'll be going to China to get our health care.
Well, you can go
Well, because
overseas.
they don't have a student
AI
debt like our doctors do. So,
Yeah, well,
There
you
you
go overseas to get your health care because it's more efficient
right.
than that. But also, I did find something else interesting: buying drugs overseas. In Spain, you think you can get Mucinex and you can get no, you can't get any drugs in Spain. They tighten them all down. You have to go see a doctor to get to get a cough medicine. Seriously, in Morocco, they give it away. So
Yeah.
if you get sick, you need to go to Morocco. If otherwise in Spain, you got to go see a doctor. You're
When
not
I-
even getting cough.
When I was in France, I got really sick, and my friends took me. But some of the pharmacists are physicians,
Yeah.
and you can share with them your problem, and they'll analyze you and then give you the medication. I mean,
Oh,
they
really? Okay, they could do that. Okay.
simple stuff over the counter. But when you need something a little more, but one of the things I found very wonderful is their medical care is almost free. Like,
Yeah. Right.
it's,
Right.
almost
Well,
free in a lot of countries.
and their costs are so much less than ours. And see that's a big issue.
and they
that-
saw me that day. I didn't have to wait.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that the U.S. needs to
Get their crap
grasp-
together.
Yeah, they need to get their act together because.
But speaking of getting their crap together, Nick, and this goes for you,
Nick
Kim,
said
as well.
act.
I know I get to the back.
Oh, you.
But this is a question for everybody because it was actually on one of those social media apps that I was on, and they were talking about this. But I've not been overseas in a minute. One of the observations that was made, and these were folks from the UK, was they felt that the relationship of like the consumer to the workers and everything, or to the shoppers, was a lot better over there than it is here. So, what was your reaction there? Because they were talking about how you see all these arguments going on in stores in the United States between the consumer and the store, but you didn't see as much of that overseas. They were actually talking to an incident that happened somewhere recently where somebody complained about Tarjay, and then there was a whole funkin' write-up in Instagram and other places about that person saying that was their version of getting reparations and all in that space. But my question is, are there more nicer relationships between the consumer and the store owners in the parts of the world that you traveled to, or did you see the same kind of mess that we get here in the United States?
Well, you don't see the mess. It's a lot less messier overseas because, like they say, the people that are like in Spain, they don't live to work; they work to live. Okay, so the thing is, and they said that
Huge difference.
they want to have a nice life basically over there, and they're not interested in all the garbage that we have here. Which, like I said, the United States is dangerous.
Well, and they
10
treat each
times
other
more
with
dangerous to
Right.
live in. 10 times more dangerous to live
and
in.
they're so respectful to each other. And one of the things I thought was interesting, and I guess it cut down on their shoplifting, but like a lot of the smaller convenience
They do
stores,
pickpocketing. They don't do shoplifting. They pickpocket.
it's all at the counter. You go there and you tell them what you want, and they go get it for you and bring it and check it out, and then you pay for it. So I noticed that when I was in Colombia, there was some of that in Europe, not a lot, but I did notice a lot of that in Colombia, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, it's just a different way of life, but their cost structure, at least health wise, is a lot less than ours.
It's
cost in general, a lot
so
less.
much better. Even Colombia, I spoke with some, I went there, and Nick, you travel, and the same thing. I just felt like the crime rate was less when I was in Colombia than
you feel safer
when I come to the U.S.
Yeah, you feel safer, but the metrics also tell you are safer over there than you are in the United States. The United States, and the Moroccans were even complaining about it. They were going, the United States is crazy. You guys are dangerous. No one wants to go visit you guys because you're dangerous. And they were right.
I mean, and every time I turn around, there's bigger and more shootings and deaths and murders. I mean, there was a murder related to my family 2 months ago, where a bunch of punks shot someone.
And unfortunately, it's not getting better. Okay, I see the U.S. has diseases that are getting worse, and the Chinese attitude is this: like Lot said, the best way to win a war is not fire a shot. So our war against the United States to take over will be real easy. We just let the U.S. implode, which is what they're looking
counting
like
on.
And
because we're all egos. That's something I heard in various places that I went to, that the Americans have a heavy-weighted ego problem and greed. And it's like you said, it's not about working to live or just.
Only the British may beat us in that one.
And it's all about one-upping, right? It's not about helping others up. It's about how much more can I one up someone. I think Trump started that. Let's one up each other in our campaign. No wonder the rest of the world is like, oh, they're going to kill each other. Our leaders can't even debate, right? Yeah. But it's always one up, and it's being rude. We're always rude now. I feel like our whole country became what everyone accused New York of being, which actually I find New York slightly friendly.
It's friendlier than, you're right, more than people think.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think we have a wrong view of our own self, and we need to look in the mirror a little bit better, because we are going to implode.
And unfortunately, our politicians are horrible. I agree with David. Okay, if your best leaders that are going to be running the country are Biden and Trump, you have a real problem.
Yeah, we're in a pathetic situation.
You're in a pathetic situation. There's got to be somebody.
No, it's the people, Nick. This is how stupid this country's become. It's not them. They don't. It's the people. It's the people who elect them or primarily put them there. It's the people have become brainless.
I partially agree with you, but then I disagree with you, because the people don't get to elect who they want, because they only get to elect from a pool of candidates that the establishment brings us.
Well, true.
That's
very true. But we should have a voice, and we don't raise it, but we should say we don't like it.
Yeah. I
don't like when the primary comes to North Carolina, there's nobody left worth voting for. They weed them out before they get here.
Show me one good leader.
Listen to the Democrats whine about the state of the country when they're the ones that have made it this way over the last 3-4 years.
No, I beg the difference. Been like this for 20 years.
In fairness, Dan, it's not restricted to the Democrats.
You can't destroy a country.
I know. I just thought I'd make
it's like spilling milk, Dan. I'm sorry, but when termites start eating your house and it falls, it didn't happen overnight. It took years to get there. So, I mean, these termites, our leaders are termites, and they're eating away at our country, and we're going to fall. We're going to fall.
Well, the American people are a victim of an undeclared war.
That's true.
And the undeclared war is between the globalists and those who want to preserve traditional liberty and freedom in the United States.
Well, it's actually between the left and the right, if you ask me.
But see, there are people on the right, supposedly, that are globalists, and there are people on the left that are not.
Well,
and the problem is the globalism is the thing that's creating the problems in the United States. The fact that we cannot be a strong nation, united, because we're being pulled apart by the special interest groups, the elites, the corporate elites, and others who have the vested interests in destroying our freedom and enslaving us as a people based on their philosophical choices. People like Bill Gates, they want to recreate this nation into a bunch of serfs, so that the middle class is destroyed, and the American people have no choice to do but whatever the government decides they should do. And that is not what America is about.
But Dan, when did that change? We've been training people in the school system.
Oh no, Mark, it's been that way for you black folks for a long time.
And not just black folks, it's been that way in the system. The system is created that you are trained to go to work for a corporation, and that is what has been encouraged, I would argue, for decades, if not centuries, in the U.S.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, then you end up going to the company store, right? There's a song by about that, and that's basically we're seeing the erosion of fundamental freedoms and rights in the United States. We're seeing the destruction of the middle class. See, the things that makes America great is, number one, it's faith, the faith of the people. Number two, the liberty and freedoms that we enjoy. And number three, the willingness of people to take risks and create small businesses and generate jobs and support our economy, because the American system was created to generate wealth and prosperity because of freedom.
No,
Now-
and along those same lines, and I know we're going to wrap up, but one of the things I'm going to bring up, and Lee may have some thoughts about this since he's in the New York, New Jersey area, but there are constant conversations around workers' rights, because I know there have even been some things around different workers' organizations here in North Carolina, but also severance rules. And some of these came up because of the pandemic. But apparently over there in the fine state of New Jersey, and the rule just went into effect last Monday, they have a new law that says that the severance pay is pretty much mandatory. So that's something that they just added to New Jersey. So is this something we're going to see spread around the country, where there will be mandatory severance pay? Which is
We're going to have to see that next week because we're at the hour, but we'll see
No
you
problem.
next time on the media show, which is coming up right afterwards on the network. Till then, good day.
See you later.
See you guys next week.
Take care.